About a year ago, popular cooking YouTuber Adam Ragusea posted a video of possibly the worst Texas brisket recipe of 2022. But he more than made up for it this year with an absolute banger of an oven brisket recipe. Like, look at this. It's juicy, the muscle fibers look tender and not overcooked or mushy, and the fat render on the surface and that connective tissue layer looks amazing. Seriously, look at this before and after comparison. These look like completely different animals. So let's go ahead and see how he made these drastic improvements.
So over here I've got a beef brisket, half a brisket. This is the flat. You could get any kind of piece of brisket that you want.
So this is the exact same brisket cut that Adam cooked back in 2022. So again, that before and after I showed you is a true apples to apples comparison. So like Adam said, this is just the flat cut of the brisket, so it's just half of it. But I'd recommend if you're going to do half of a brisket that you get the point half, which is also called the fatty, which as the name entails is a very fatty cut of the brisket, and because of that it has a really nice deep beef flavor. Because you already know, everybody, fat is flavor.
Trim down this fat cap a little bit just because it's a little bit thicker than I want, but that's really not kind of integral to this method of doing it in the oven.
So already I'm seeing an improvement in the recipe from last year. So previously Adam just took his brisket, opened up the package, took it out, and started seasoning it. He did not trim the brisket at all. So first of all, trimming the brisket gets rid of all of the large hunks of fat on the brisket, because once the brisket's done cooking, these large hunks of fat are not gonna render down, and nobody wants to eat unrendered fat, trust me. And secondly, which is probably not that important, but if you trim the fat and make it even on the brisket, once the brisket's done, you get this nice, even band of fat right on the top of the brisket, and for presentation purposes, looks fantastic.
Rub it down with liquid smoke. You know, really quite a lot of it to replicate the smoky taste of real barbecue.
So if you've never had liquid smoke, it has a very dark and like pungent taste. The way I describe it in barbecue terms is it's like a more acidic version of like the smoke you get from charcoal, like if you're cooking in like a Weber kettle. Not like the nice, mild, sweet smoke flavor that you get when you burn full splits of white oak. So it's nearly impossible to imitate real Texas barbecue with liquid smoke, but an added benefit of using the liquid smoke is that it can act as a binder for the brisket. That way, Adam can get a nice even coat of seasoning on both sides.
And I'm gonna put a rack underneath this. You don't have to do the rack. It just slightly better replicates the kind of open environment of a hot smoker in which you normally make barbecue.
So using a wire rack to lift the brisket up off of the pan is absolutely necessary. Here's why. So when you cook a brisket, it reduces down to like half of its size because of all the water loss during the cook. So if you don't use a wire rack, all of that liquid is going to release into the pan and pretty much braise the brisket. So you're gonna end up with a pot roast instead of a barbecue brisket. So whenever I'm doing an oven brisket, I usually use these foil pans and then just put the wire rack right on top of it like this. And I like to use the foil pans because it makes cleaning so much easier. Because once I'm done, I can just take the pan and throw it in the trash rather than having to scrub off all of that baked on beef fat on a baking sheet.
Okay, now if I had like a pre-mixed barbecue rub, I would use it. I don't. I'm just gonna improvise one directly on top of the meat. I'm more aggressive with the flavoring than I normally am when I barbecue a brisket, just because, you know, there is a certain characteristic flavor that the liquid smoke has, and if you can distract from it a little bit, it really is an almost perfect doppelganger for real barbecue.
So Adam's rub recipe has garlic powder, it has salt, pepper, cumin, paprika, and like a few other things. If you want to know the recipe, just watch his video. But I love this approach when making oven barbecue because at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to replicate perfectly Texas style barbecue that's done on a real wood smoke fire. So instead of trying to keep the recipe like super traditional and just using salt and pepper even though you're cooking the brisket in the oven, you got to introduce some new flavors that are unique and that can enhance the liquid smoke and complement it so you can make something new and really good. I did the exact same thing in my own oven brisket recipe. I used lapsang tea and a bunch of other stuff and it turned out amazing.
I'm just gonna throw this straight into the oven right now. The oven is at 225 Fahrenheit and I've got the convection fan on. I think that that's pretty important.
So I've made and I've tried a lot of oven brisket recipes in my non-convection oven and they turned out amazing. But I would imagine that a convection oven would do a much better job. So in the big offset smokers that barbecue restaurants use, the meat is cooked with convection, which is a much more gentle heat in comparison to the radiant heat that an oven uses. To show you an example of what I mean, this is my Goldie's offset smoker running at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And even though that's really hot, I can put my bare hand on the brisket brisket and lift it up. If I tried to do that in an oven, I would absolutely burn my hand on the sizzling beef grease. Now, a convection oven, I'm pretty sure still cooks with radiant heat because the heating element is inside of the oven with the food, but it probably helped at least a little bit.
It's been an hour, let's go check our brisket. Now, believe it or not, this will eventually have a bark or a crust on it.
Okay, this is very interesting. So after taking the brisket out, Adam put more liquid smoke on top and then put it back in the oven. And I think this might be one of the reasons why his brisket turned out so good at the end. So last year when Adam cooked his brisket, he used a Weber kettle and he had way too much oxygen going inside. So the wood chunks and the charcoal were like blazing. So his cook from last year was more of like a direct heat grilling versus a low and slow barbecue. But for this brisket, for starters, he's cooking only at 225 degrees Fahrenheit. And now after only 1 hour, he's taking it off the heat, putting liquid smoke on top, and then later on in the cook, he's actually gonna take it out again and then wrap the brisket. By taking the brisket on and off the heat, he's basically slowing down the cooking momentum of the brisket. This will give the meat ample time to break down the collagen without drying it out, despite the hot heat that the oven is cooking it with.
Oh, and a little water in that pan wouldn't be a bad idea. You know, there's steam in a normal smoker environment. You know, wood makes steam when it burns, a little steam.
So I don't think this really hurts or helps much because like I said before, the brisket while it's cooking is gonna release a lot of moisture and that's gonna drip into the pan and essentially do the same thing here. But it does take heat to evaporate that cold water he just added in, so that's just slowing down the cook, which again is a good thing.
So after 3 or 4 hours in the oven, that brisket is about as dark as it's gonna be. What I'm gonna do now is do what you would do in normal barbecue and wrap it for the duration of its cooking. Foil is just fine. And I wanna wrap it.
Yeah, that's kind of a tough one. So this is a catch-22 and one of the reasons why oven barbecue doesn't work super well. So at this 3 or 4 hour mark, the brisket is looking really tight. And I can tell just by the way it moved on the table. It had more of a bounce like rubber versus like a jiggle like Jello. When it's tight like that, that means there's a lot of water that still needs to be released from the brisket. And if you wrap this early, all of that water is gonna release inside of the foil and it's gonna wash off all the seasoning at the bottom and also make it soggy. But at the same time, because an oven cooks so hot, you can see on his brisket that the sides of the brisket are starting to curl up. And that just happens from the rapid heat that's cooking the brisket. It's making the proteins bind together very quickly. And if left unwrapped, those edges that are sticking up are gonna dry out before the brisket is done cooking. So ultimately, I think Adam picked the lesser of two evils here.
So the brisket took literally 13 hours to get to 195 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about like 90 C, and that's about when you want to pull it from the oven. Yeah, this took a long time, but this is how long real barbecue takes, and that's why this is gonna taste like real barbecue.
Yeah, that's about dead on for barbecue. Usually in big offsets, it takes about 12 to 14-ish hours to cook a brisket, so spot on there. Also wanted to say I love Adam's confidence here because mind you, he hasn't even cut into this brisket yet. He's already like calling his shot. Could you imagine if he cut into it and it was just like terrible? This video would probably have never came out and I wouldn't be doing this right now.
Down the middle for the money shot. Oh yeah.
You can see that even though this is a flat cut, there is a bit of point meat on the top of it, and both the point and the flat look great here. I love that shot where he puts his finger on the flat meat and kind of like opens up the fibers. It just looks so tender. Now the flat does look a little bit dry, but you have to remember that out of the package, this brisket had like virtually no marbling. On top of that, he cooked this brisket in a hot oven for 13 hours. Like, it should be way worse than this. This is amazing. Like, obviously I need to see it in person to make a true evaluation, but I seriously think he killed this. This is one of the best oven briskets I've seen on YouTube, and I'm not even joking. So during Adam's brisket cook, he also made an oven barbecue chicken recipe alongside it. And when he tried it in a sandwich, he had this to say.
That tastes like barbecue because that is barbecue, just by different means.
So I have some serious doubts about Adam's claims here, but at the same time, I've never cooked an oven barbecue chicken recipe, so there's only one way to find out. So first of all, the chicken skin was like really bad on this chicken. It was like rubbery fruit leather. But I knew that that was gonna happen because if you wanna get nice crispy chicken skin, you gotta cook the chicken way hotter than 225. Really not tasting any smoke flavor at all, but I mean, it's a pretty good chicken sandwich. So it's been a while since my last React video, but all year I've been traveling across the US learning from the best pitmasters in the world while filming my Barbecue Story YouTube series. And you can watch the last episode of Barbecue Story by clicking the video on your screen right now, and I'll see you guys over there. React is back!